Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of ZNL. Very excited to have my very good friend James Kanter on the show today. James has been on this podcast before and is also a regular at the EU Influencer event, which is going to take place on September the 19th. So welcome, James. How are you today?
I'm great. It's so nice to be back on the show, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very excited. And of course, I want to first talk about your own podcast, EU Screams. So tell us a little bit about how that is going. How has it evolved from your initial idea to where it is today? And, are you making a difference? Is it successful? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel great about it. I mean, we've evolved in many ways, but we're still consistent with what we started out with in a way, which is being media that brings progressive, factful voices to the EU conversation. There are clear angles, there's careful editing, and that's all about bridging insiders with real world listeners. And each episode takes an issue in the news cycle and then takes a big step back, and it makes connections with something larger around civil rights or climate equity or global south or state capture. And it's kind of audio essayistic in that sense. And that's always that was always the vision. And I must say that being independent, right, has meant that we avoid the false equivalency issue where newsmakers are always treated equally, when in reality, some of them out there are distorting reality entirely. And, I tend to value the idea of being truthful rather than neutral, especially when it comes to one of the big elephants in the room, which is, signs that the European Union is capitulating to the far right's coordinated attempt to hijack the European project.
So for you, it's a political project where you're expressing your views and opinions and having conversation. How do you pick the topics and the guests and how do you prepare for a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of EU Scream is that we talk about the EU differently. So it's not prima facie a political goal with, and we have no allegiance to any particular political party. No, the goal of every episode is to blend news or with a conversation or conversations that dive deeper into one of these topics in the news cycle. It's about showing the interconnectedness of issues and ideologies. But again, particularly important to me about EU Scream, and I think to a lot of people in Brussels, a lot of people, some of whom are not, shall we say, able, or they don't feel empowered to express this, is this idea of avoiding false equivalency. The problem these days, and it's been this way for a while now, is that being neutral in journalism has given the way that politics has evolved over the past decade and the public conversation has evolved, being neutral risks privileging non-fact and non-science and a lot of nonsense. And the truth is, Phil, that every side does not always deserve equal coverage. So that's why, again, I come back to this idea of being truthful rather than neutral.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about what that means. So journalism, perhaps traditionally, and you can help us to understand that, is supposedly about facts, and then you have a special space for opinion. What you're doing and what we could say a generation of podcasters and influencers are doing is saying, look, I have a view, I have a story, and I want to tell that story. I don't need to have a journalistic neutral point of view. Now, so is that what you're saying, and is that a good thing? Because if what you see in the United States, well, I guess everywhere, is podcasters who are having political, or at least points of view, and they're not necessarily attached to a party. But do you think that isn't that going to increase polarization in society?
So look, there's a lot in this question, and if you'll allow me, I'll take a bit of a step back. There was an EU media poll earlier this year. I was on a panel there, and it showed a cratering of influence among legacy media, even in Brussels. I mean, people in this town, they use these legacy media to do their job. So the declines are a little bit weird in that sense, and some of the results were contested, as you might imagine, and these things always are. But this result does echo the idea that legacy media is losing out to a proliferation of other options and outlets, also perhaps to algorithms that are designed to keep us engaged on our socials. Then there's news avoidance too, people just feeling overwhelmed. And maybe, and here I start to maybe get a little bit towards answering your question, maybe because people are just a little bit cheesed off with media. I mean, I do sense a growing frustration in the EU bubble about not seeing more justified outrage about the way the EU has been struggling to handle climate, migration, big tech, authoritarians in the EU, pet authoritarians in countries like Slovakia and Hungary, and then of course we have the situation in the Middle East and in Gaza. There is reporting on these issues out there, and it can be excellent, but there are many people in our community who say that reporting is just not prominent enough, and there's an urgency that is missing. Now, if you'll allow me, I also want to address the other part of your question, which is about influencers versus journalists. And this is not a straightforward thing, because there are hazards to embracing. Sorry, this is maybe a bit of a long way of saying it, but there are hazards to embracing a non-legacy media future where you are relying on influencers. Why? Because journalists are working for what they define as the truth, and some of them are becoming influencers. But influencers are primarily working to create a community that they can monetize, and some of them are becoming journalists. Now, these things can live together, but there are major questions here. And that's why I don't want to be glib about it. Democracy and accountability it just cannot rely on ever larger numbers of personalities reacting and emoting to the news. So here's the question. How do we get to a place where influencers who are becoming journalists do editing and do fact checking? Because at the moment, people like Joe Rogan can get away with being wrong all day long and do that with impunity. I mean, one way forwards, of course, is that social media platforms and the big podcasts are subject to the same rules that every other sort of media is subject to. But that would mean changing the law.
Yeah, but I think the trend that you've observed and that's being recorded is that people are consuming news from these new sources more than they used to from traditional legacy media. And so we have podcasters, we have different YouTube channels, these news sources, and a lot of these people are former journalists. We have people in Brussels like you, like Dave Keating. I've also been following Tara Palmieri, who used to be a Politico journalist and who's gone on her own. And I think there's a big kind of story saying, hey, I want to take control over the story and I want to tell the story differently. And I actually find myself, enjoying the perspective of an individual on a news story rather than just the BBC or CNN or whatever, which feels formatted in a way that I don't know. Our brains are maybe moving away from this.
I think you put that very well. Yeah.
Yeah, and my question then, and let's go to what the role these people play, because the White House now invites these influencers to press briefings or to influencer briefings. The Downing Street invited influencers and TikTok and Instagram, whatever, to come to Downing Street and basically start building a relationship. So I'd like to ask you, what do you feel about that? And is Europe doing this in any way, or is it just missing the boat? And I'm talking about the EU institutions.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I'm not privy to their thinking on this, and I'll be a little bit critical. I think that the EU is thinking along these lines. Clearly, they want echo chamber influencers, and I get that, and they, to some degree, do that pretty well. But look, I do not see them yet funding journalism that really, really holds Brussels to account. They are still funding the kind of journalism that is putting the cart before the horse. If you want that money, first you need a consortium, and then, you need X number of reporters in X number of member states to win funding for a project. And that's absolutely not how all the best stories are reported out. I mean, sometimes the best stories start out as a discrete event in one place or a village or somewhere. And, at some point you have to have funding to see if there are links in other parts of Europe or the world. And that's what the, groups like Lighthouse Reports do so well, because they also hold the EU accountable. And I do not see current EU money being spent on that. And I do get the idea of building a European information or European public space thing, and I have some sympathy for that goal, but it's not a sufficient approach. Now, so that's my thinking on what the institutions are up to and institutional funding. But you also asked about, like, well, in a nutshell, who should be accredited as a journalist, right? That's kind of at the heart of what you're asking there.
Yeah.
And I would say that the U.S. Under Trump is a lesson in how not to manage press rooms. I mean, Trump world is replacing traditional media with white supremacists, pro-Russians, and extreme libertarians. Is that the way we really want to go? I don't think so. In Brussels, we already kind of see enough of that. We already have leading questions in the press room coming, leading questions rather than substantive questions coming from, say, Hungarian outlets. And people often making comments as much as asking questions. It is, of course, a good thing to mix things up a bit so you don't just have the legacy and super ultra micro specialized media dominating EU press rooms. I mean, EU press rooms are famous for talking about topics that the rest of the world cannot relate to. So it's good to have a greater plurality of voices, including those you don't like. Mm-hmm. But how they get the balance right, so you avoid inviting people who want to destroy democracy into the press room, that is a great question for European Commission accreditation folks, right? And it's not one that I can answer. But in my view, answering that question only gets harder with the proliferation of outlets. And that's the world that we're now in.
Yeah, and I think as we move to a different kind of media consumption, which is what you observed and what we're seeing, people just need to engage with those new content creators, whether they're on the left or the right or the middle. I think the content is one thing. The question is, if the conversation's there, you really need to be addressing the people who are talking to the audiences and that are shaping opinion. And I think that's to me, that's the underlying question about legacy versus, say, digital influencers or whatever we want to call them. It's, if you're focusing all your energy on legacy, you are in a smaller echo chamber than if you were talking to the digital influencers, whatever the mix you choose to be to create.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I would put that. I mean, I don't have the answers here, but I would say, well, perhaps a better role for funding coming from the European Commission when it comes to journalism is maybe thinking a bit more about ensuring that influencers as such, if they do have such a wide reach, at least have the option to have fact checking, at least have the option to have journalism training. Mm-hmm. That would be, I think, very, very helpful.
Interesting. So I want to come back to EU Screen. So what's the thing that is there an episode or a moment that you're particularly proud of or excited about that happened? And are you having the impact you were hoping to have? Are you starting conversations or shaping the needle on big topics?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do. I know that a lot of journalists and opinion formers listen to the podcast because it prompts them to think differently about what's in the news cycle, and that's very, very satisfying. I get great feedback from people on how episodes have helped them think differently about very important and very difficult topics. And so that is very rewarding. And I do feel like the podcast has very much succeeded. And I'll give you maybe a couple of examples. There was an episode we had earlier this year called Resisting Nazi-Era Narratives at the European Parliament. And here I spoke with an MEP. She's a liberal. Her name is Raquel Hermida van der Walle. She's Spanish by origin, but she's living in the Netherlands and elected there. She's someone who is actively involved in trying to push back against this overwhelming barrage of xenophobia, anti-system rhetoric from the three far-right groups that now make up around a third of the European Parliament. And so actually hearing from somebody at the coalface dealing with this phenomenon, that I think a lot of people found very interesting, as well as the way that I put together audio snapshots of MEPs from these three far-right blocks. You put those sound clips together of Islamophobia, of ultra-libertarian views, dismantle the European Central Bank with crypto, that kind of stuff. And at that point, it's no punches pulled. People really start to get it when they hear that, I think. Another one that I know has been widely listened to is one called Germany, Gramsci and the Rise of the AfD, the German far-right political party. And in some ways, this episode is on this kind of long arc of the far right from the defeat at the end of World War II to its rebirth, right? It's been a long road for the far right since the Third Reich and Nazism. And now we have its rebirth. And that did not happen by chance. A lot of thought was put into it. And there are a lot of scholars, of course, on this. I found one who was connecting all of these things about how the far right had exercised its rebirth, and I timed that with the German election and the stronger showing of the AfD to show how they had used the culture wars, which is the thinking of Antonio Gramsci, this thinker from the early part of the 20th century, to normalize the previously unthinkable. So in the case of the AfD and large parts of Germany, mass deportations. And again, this emphasis on culture. And that's something that's particularly visible in the recent surge of the AfD. And it's something that has been adopted very much by the far right and the way it's been so active in Brussels.
Yeah, and my favorite quote from Gramsci is, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters, which I think is just very eloquently put. Actually, this is one of the topics, the main topic of the EU influencer event, which we're hosting in September, is about Europe on the edge of chaos, on the edge perhaps of opportunity. So I just want to ask you a little bit about how do you feel that are we on the edge of some kind of massive breakdown? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? How do you feel about the future?
I mean, there's so many different ways to come at this question. I mean, we can talk about the specifics of the politics as well, which I'd quite like to do. But in terms of answering your question about whether there's a crisis before there's a renewal and so on and so forth, I know there are thinkers out there who offer that idea. Are historical events associated with recurring generational personas? Is institutional life about to be destroyed and rebuilt in response to a threat? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that generational groupings or a generational perspective is any more powerful than other ways of viewing historical forces and phenomena, which frankly I'm more familiar with, such as economic class, race, religion, political parties, political movements. I might be somebody who, at least from the get-go, would subscribe more to those. But I suppose at the moment, if you had to push me, put me under the hot lights and say, well, crisis or whatever, I'd come out with another, $10 word, which is hypernormalization, because hypernormalization describes life in a society or societies where people are seeing that our governing systems and institutions are broken or breaking down. But second, they are seeing that for reasons like poor leadership and a seeming inability to imagine how to disrupt the status quo. I mean, maybe that could be to do with social media, I don't know. People are carrying on pretty much with their lives as normal, getting on airplanes, going on holiday, hypernormalization as a term, it means we're a bit frozen. And in a sense, Phil, rather than being ripe for the kind of revolutions that a fourth turning or, might imply, perhaps people are ripe for more manipulation. And that's what really concerns me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the question and the reason we picked the edge, Europe on the edge topic is because I think we are in a genuinely different moment in history, where, as you said, people are increasingly skeptical about institutions. There are new forces at play, and it just, I think it's important to realize that nothing is permanent. Things are vulnerable, and things could change one way or the other. And I think we should be optimistic that they could change in a positive direction, because sometimes awareness of these broken systems means people decide to take action. But yeah, for me, the thing is, I think we are at a unique moment now. Again, where it's going to go, and whether it's a fourth turning is a good model, which is obviously the book that we were discussing before. Which I think is just interesting to have, to look at different mental models to see what can explain the world we live in today. I think it's
and I'm so glad that you brought up the fourth turning, because it prompted me to think more deeply about what I might think about that. So that's a conversation that should be had.
Now, coming back to your podcast, something that I really like about podcasts, and I had a radio project when I was a student, is this intimacy with voice. And I just want to know, how do you feel about the kind of connection you have with listeners? Do you feel you're talking to a single person through voice? And how do you feel about video, since, this is the big question. A lot of podcasters are now becoming video plus voice. Are you thinking about that? Does it disturb you? Or how do you feel about the medium and the conversation it creates?
Yeah, I mean, you're dead right that there is this intimacy to the audio format, and you clearly know this from your radio days, and I know it from my experience over recent years with podcasting. And I do feel that I am addressing people who really are, they do feel like they're not catered to by the headlines that they see out there. They want to know more about the story behind the story, or what people really think, or their emotional response to what's in the news. And I think that if you can capture that on audio, you've captured an entire universe, right? There are these very special moments that you can have on audio. Having said that, I guess that after or during the COVID pandemic is when we saw a surge in video, as people started recording each other screen to screen, as we are now, and this technology became far more widespread and easy to use. And then from a commercial perspective, there's this idea in video that viewers aren't skipping over ads as much, and companies like Spotify are now involved. And so there's money for shows that use video by, from celebs and others. But here's the thing, Phil. I mean, whether people are truly watching the video or just let it run in the background is a big question. Are people using video like audio while they work, drive, and clean? Because from the data or from the journalism on this, I love journalism about journalism, we all do. It seems like many users are just glancing down if they hear something funny. So is the effort of making video worthwhile? Mm-hmm. And that there are thousands upon thousands of cuts and edits that go into highly listenable audio podcasts. So how many can you use on video before this starts to look pretty glitchy or weird? And of course, what we also know is that high-end AI is probably coming along that's going to be able to fix that. Then, they're going to be the same non-negotiables in video as in audio. You need a credible voice that audiences can connect with, as you were talking about earlier, and who have real authority on their subject matter. And inauthenticity or repackaged content or, forcing people onto camera for video podcasts just for the sake of it. I mean, audiences are going to detect that immediately as being a problem. They have a really sixth sense about this. So anyway, I haven't quite made up my mind yet, but clearly it would be great to dip a toe into video as well.
Yeah, I think it's a trend that just gives people another option. I think you're right. People are listening to it in the background. Spotify now, shows the video in the Spotify app, and so that means you can really switch between the two. But I think that for certain kinds of consumption, if you're sitting down, maybe watching an iPad or something like that, you might want to see the image. If you're just in your car, then you want to see the sound. So I think that people want the
some people might actually want to see the road still, but that's a whole
well, no, that's what I'm saying. They should not be watching the video when they're driving, but they can have the two. So like if they are doing something else, I think they should do it. But I'm like things like the rest is politics US or UK. Hard Folk, this is a New York Times podcast I'm listening to on tech. They all have the image, and I think it's kind of like you get used to the two, but also with the rest is politics, for example, they do, it's very much from home. So you can see that the setup it's not that polished. They have a good mic, and it's the lights aren't always perfect or things like that. So I think that's standard that we're now getting used to. But I want to come back to you. You mentioned AI, and of course this is the big conversation now. But I want to come back to the discussion we had about legacy media, and what legacy media. And I don't know if that's a negative term now, or let's just say traditional media, was intended to be kind of neutral, researched, objective information on key topics. So you go to a website and you at least know that the facts that they're showing should be researched. I mean, I think there's a great deal of skepticism, and then there's a voice of the journalist. If they go on TV, they have to sound a certain way, and for me, this is increasingly feeling like an AI kind of experience, which is like, we want this clean, neutral, almost robotic thing. It's almost like a certain corporate language. We write like a corporation where it's very neutral and not that human. That's, I would say, the old style. Journalism is a bit like that. What you get with a new journalist is human beings who tell the story the way they want. They ramble a little bit. They make mistakes. And so I'm just wondering whether, in the end, we're not going to be replacing traditional journalists with an AI thing. So, okay, give me the facts, explain them to me clearly, give me a presenter that has a uniform sounding voice, which is like almost, the BBC, like it has to sound very, very similar. I'm just wondering whether you think that that's going to be journalism, on the one hand, and then you'll have all the humans, the influencers will be telling stories with their own voice.
Yeah, I mean, it's an optimistic scenario that let's say a news update, breaking news or something.
Yeah.
You might be able to generate that more easily in an AI voice, and nobody is going to know the difference. Nobody will know the difference. I mean, they really won't.
Exactly. I mean, if you have your 10 top news bullets, which is what you used to have your news on the hour, I think that'll be AI generated. It's like, here are the top
I mean,
five.
almost certainly, and all news organizations will jump at the opportunity not to be paying human beings for that. I mean, we know that there's a labor issue here as well. I mean, we saw the strike in Hollywood, and we know what these immense industrial transformations can do to the labor market. So yes, there will be that, and I'm not celebrating it, but I fully agree with you that that's what's coming. And then you will need journalists who are confident on camera, who can display personality, who can explain ideas in a really compelling way, can bring an audience along with them in order to do the, shall we say, the human dimension. So yes, I mean, I think that's the world that we're moving towards when it comes to some form of mass media, if that term even still applies.
So I know that you have mixed feelings on AI. So tell us a little bit. Are you an excited technophile saying AI is going to change the world, or not so sure, or the complete opposite?
It's absolutely going to change the world, but I guess I was. Forgive me, I'll take a sip of water. So I guess I was always a bit, standoffish about the idea that AI is such a revolution, because I've been using automated translation for a while. I've been transcribing interviews for a while. I've been using proofreading tools for a while. I mean, these are all AI. But there are new toys and tools out there, which are, of course, pretty remarkable. And I think everyone has their own, if you like, Damascene experience when it comes to AI. And I hadn't really had one until about a month ago.
Okay.
And that's when I started fooling around on some of the AI music generators. And these things, they make a song out of a few prompts and hints, and you can insert a few of your own lyrics. And what really blew me away was the quality. I mean, it's hard to control exactly what you'll get. You can plug in the suggestion for country and western or K-pop or some such, but it's kind of good. And then what really astounded me, what I still can't quite get over, is how the AI music generators, they match highly irregular lyrics to any melody. It's kind of astonishing. And this is the Arthur C. Clarke moment, right? Where any sufficiently advanced technology is supposed to be indistinguishable from magic. And that's the experience I had at that moment. Am I going to use it? Probably not.
This is your own. This is your own near singularity moment. So
yeah.
So just, did you produce a song? You're right. Go for it.
But
so I need to ask you: did you produce a song, and can you share it with us? Because I'd like to see what came out of your creative experience.
Yeah, I put something on Blue Sky, I think, and it had absolutely zero take up.
Well, I will reshare it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I mean, the lyrics there were a few prompts that I stuck in there about Ursula von der Leyen and the trade talks, and then it kind of did the rest. I mean, it writes the lyrics too, but it was the way it put it together that I was just blown away. I have to say. But am I going to use it? Probably not. I mean, I get my music from elsewhere, and I don't really need that kind of AI generated music necessarily. But it was a wake-up call of sorts, a reminder of what this industry is all about. I mean, we've reached the stage of wholesale replacement of artists, and that is being powered by AI indexing and copying of existing work. So I hope that these lawsuits against the AI firms succeed, because these leaps forward are obviously prima facie based on copying of our stuff without remuneration. And big tech has already had a very harmful impact on many parts of the media industry, taking away advertising and so on and so forth. And I also think, and you and I have talked about this before, that we need some kind of mandatory requirement in our profession, or even under the law or on platforms, that a piece of content is either synthetic or non-synthetic. I mean, how we're going to make the difference between those two in the future, I'm not really sure, but we're going to have standards of some sort.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. And it's funny because you mentioned the music experience where, most people, it's their first encounter with ChatGPT, writing a song or a poem or something like that. My personal view is that the changes, that AI is going to have a profound transformative impact on everything we do, but that we're in this very, very confusing hype cycle right now, and that it's just, you cannot believe 90% of what people are saying about what AI does. And so I think for most people, it's just very confusing because they read something saying, oh, if you use this prompt, if you use this thing, it's going to change your life. They do, it doesn't, because it doesn't work the way it's advertised. And I think that that's one very confusing things, which hides the incredibly powerful things that you can do. As I mentioned before many times, is deep research is incredibly useful. We're also working on actually video generation. You can start creating more and more useful video content that you would have had to, pay a lot of money to create a set and to create a thing. So things that have become possible that were simply not possible before. And indeed, coming back to your point about authentication, so I think that, what it means is that I don't think it's going to destroy artists or content creators. I think it's going to put a premium on a certain form of authenticity and identification. So people can say, look, this is me, a human, this is what I'm writing, and I'm, like our conversation, this is a human conversation. I'm not scripting it with ChatGPT. And if people want to hear, those conversations, it's very different from just reading these generic conversations, which are taking over platforms like LinkedIn, people writing content that sounds and feels very generic.
Yeah.
So I think we're at this very interesting moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I mean, a lot of these, let's take the AI music boosters. I mean, they insist that human creativity will always be the key ingredient. I mean, okay. Yeah. But let's see.
I think it's just that it's about using those tools creatively. And again, it's not that straightforward. And if you just, so creating something new and better and more interesting requires some prompting, some playing around. And, once everybody's doing it, then other things will stand out because of the original elements that you have to bring to them. But I want to come to the platforms. We've talked about this several times as at the EU Influencer. It's a moment when we try to see where we are in Brussels with platforms. And in fact, that was also, I think, in your media poll discussion that you had some time back. So I think we've seen, and we talked about this last time, LinkedIn has become the kind of dominant hub, but X has not gone away. Instagram is increasing. And then you've got the other platforms. So where is your platform focus now? Where are you spending time, and what do you see coming up?
Yeah, I mean, look, Phil, let me just make very clear where I do stand on this. I mean, it's absolutely clear now that Elon Musk bought Twitter to turn it into a right-wing propaganda mill with a specific goal of undermining journalism, informed consensus. He's used it to normalize, amplify, and validate really repellent forces and white supremacy. So let's not forget this. And let me also say that I think continuing to post to X, I mean, you don't have to kill your account. I mean, everyone needs to go on to these things every now and again to, if somebody, but continuing to post to X, especially by the EU institutions, it's just so deeply at odds with their stated values. And it shows how our politicians and leaders, they just can't seem to find a new home in this newly polarizing, this newly fragmenting media environment, which actually, Phil, you've been very good at talking about at your events. I mean, you predicted this fragmented microblogging environment. So what about the alternatives? I mean, I do like the idea of microblogs like Blue Sky and Mastodon that federate with each other, and portability, which is the ability to migrate social identities and data between the different platforms, and that way you don't get locked in. But currently, how many others beyond Blue Sky and Mastodon are really pushing and promoting federated protocols? I don't really know. And then there's this question, is Blue Sky really billionaire proof? Can it really remain a world without Caesars, as the Blue Sky chief executive seems to be promising? What's really to stop them selling out for obscene amounts of money? And now inevitably we have the turn against Substack as being evil. I mean, I don't know about that in detail, except there are white supremacist newsletters out there and the predictable amplification of the hate of hate. And my point here, and this is kind of where I'm going, is that what is true is that beyond all of this, unless you have your own portal, you are liable to have the carpet whipped from under you by a provider, even if you build up a following. And that's why EU Scream has always kept and now even upgraded its website. So I do think it's going to always be important to think, well, the social media thing is immensely rewarding and important. And to answer your initial question, I definitely will be tripling down on Blue Sky and on LinkedIn. Both of those places I'm very comfortable with for the most part, although there is kind of an enshittification of LinkedIn, which I think is a bit worrying. And you were referring to that with the chat GPT generated posts and a lot of the AI art. If we could see less of those two things, that would be great. But even so, I mean, these are the best places I think to be in the current environment. But I always think it's good to have a fallback, to be able to make sure that you do have somewhere to go that's almost your own if you can afford it and if you can afford to maintain it.
Yeah, and we'll check in again, when during the event to see where people are, and I think we'll find that, LinkedIn is the big platform. I think one of the surprises is that X did not disappear and has actually been much more resilient than I think people thought it might be. Less active and less effective, by the way. Even for people who are trying to get things, I think the reach you get on LinkedIn, on X, has become, you just post things and you just don't get your traction. It's become a right-wing ecosystem for sure. And then
and to that point, if I may, I mean, there's now new studies that are being done to show that anyone who, or not anyone, but people who have been critical of Musk and of the transition from Twitter to X, or are just not X's cup of tea, they are effectively shadow banned, and there are a lot of people who are not getting traction on X anymore because they have been expressing their views. But again, it doesn't apply to everyone, so it's very, very hard to know how all of this is operating. And I think that's always been part of the mystery of platforms, and why a lot of researchers continue to look into them and want the data.
Yeah, I think it's important for people who use the platforms to understand that every platform has an agenda, and that whatever it is, it's driven by algorithms. Whether and Blue Sky has also become an echo chamber of a certain political persuasion. X, has moved in one space, and basically LinkedIn is kind of like the more business space. But all these have, there's a strategy behind them. And even with Mastodon, I was talking to somebody who basically was on a server, because in Mastodon you operate on these kind of distributed servers, and the person running the server said, look, I can't afford to continue, and just shut it down. And so that person just lost their entire account overnight because the person had said, look, sorry, I can't continue. Now Blue Sky is now promising a form of interoperability. I was very excited about this. I've had recent conversations about this becoming it's the ATP protocol underneath Blue Sky that could potentially, and is already, connecting different blog systems and different things that could allow you to move your followers and your comments from one place to the other. I think this, and if the EU decided to embrace it, it would certainly, accelerate its uptake in the bubble. But I'm still interested, and I think there's still something there. I think, again, every platform, however open source it is still driven by some form of agenda, and that's why you need to be ready to move and ready to kind of adapt your message and story to different things. And as you said, owning your own blog post or a website is also critical in this kind of moment.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that. I didn't know what you would make of that, and I'm really glad that you sort of echoed that back. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think the other element I would add, so having your web page, having a newsletter with emails is also incredibly useful. It's like, to me, email fascinates me because it is so old and so boring, and yet still so incredibly effective. And we tend to get excited by the latest shiny new thing. But I think that the future is in this distributed approach where you have a story and that you have a pillar. So in your case, your podcast, but then you find different places to continue that conversation, and that those spaces can move and change a lot. And, one thing I find quite fascinating is with the X transformation. People like John Worth, who obviously talk about this, but even Andrew Stroline, who also had massive followings on X. They've kind of completely abandoned this,
Yeah.
but they haven't found the same critical mass
No.
in the other channels. And you have to wonder, does it, how must it feel that you've left your 100,000 followers, and then you don't have an impact as much as you had before. So I do think that, and I've seen actually with Human Rights Watch. So Andrew has left the platform, but there's some other people from the organization that are still posting on X. And so again, it's kind of like, yes, the owner of the platform has views that most people would find incredibly disturbing, but does that mean that you don't want to use it if you can to reach a certain audience? I think it's a question that we have to revisit on a regular basis.
Look, I mean, the only question here, it is very simplistic, and I'm just echoing what John Worth has said, our great friend from our community here, that all pressure should be brought to bear on the European Commission, the European Council, and the European Parliament itself to post to X second if they must, and prefer another microblogging platform. That would do it's a simple game changer. I mean, that would force everyone to look somewhere else first.
Yeah.
I don't think it's rocket science.
No, I think you're right. And by the way, that some of these conversations are taking place.
Good.
But again, whether moving the commission to do something like that takes time. I think if the interoperability can work, then this becomes interesting, and you can even repost from there to other places. On the other hand, you need to balance that with the fact that you want to have your maximum reach as well. And I tell this because I obviously work with clients in communication, which is you have to go where your audience is, and you can't. I don't think it's reasonable for somebody who's in communication trying to observe the latest conversation to say, look, I'm going to completely quit the X environment if it matters, however much I might not agree with it. And I think you just need to keep an eye on different things. Like you would check a story on Fox News if it runs and if it makes sense, and if you need to understand it. It doesn't mean you agree with the platform owner and their strategy and their political views. But I think there are conversations, and there's still a sliver of hope with Blue Sky, but there's a real need for critical mass for these things to become more impactful.
Which is super easy to create if in any community, and ours happens to be the EU institutions, if they prefer it, it's in their it's entirely in their gift.
Absolutely. So now, in all of this, one of my favorite questions is always to ask people, what is their advice and wisdom for the next generation? Since we're in the fourth turning, we need to pay attention to what the millennials and the Zs are doing. So when you meet one of those people, and I have kids that age, and I meet a lot of students and friends. There's a great deal of anxiety about the future, about what jobs are going to be replaced by AI, because that's a big narrative. Graduates are struggling to get jobs more than previous generations of graduates. So what do you tell people, young people, when they come to you and say, what should I do? What skills do I need to survive in this scary jungle?
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's stuff that I guess I would always share with communicators, I one of those things has been the same forever and ever and ever, and the second one is a bit new. But the first one would be that, and really for years I've begged people to do this, it's always to talk in specifics when they're talking about stuff that's happening on their beats or in the industry sectors that they're watching. Don't, please don't talk about a framework or a directive or an article, but try and strip that away, even if it's just for a moment, and see how it sounds. If you talk about an actual person with a name doing a real thing in a real place, like a court or a parliamentary hearing, or and what they're doing to a real company or another real organization, and maybe you're not going to get that approach past your supervisor, but please have a go, because that's going to make all the difference, and it's going to win you so many friends, especially among journalists, who will instantly say to themselves, oh my gosh, this person is not just reciting something that they've been told to recite. They actually get it, and they put some thought into it. So specifics, real people, real examples, real life consequences.
I just want to just jump in there just before we get to the next one, because actually I've been kind of working with a couple of Instagram influencers, or let's say people who want to learn how to do this, and they're all kind of in the EU world, and they've been posting content in a really creative and interesting way, and they're doing this in their own time, and they create videos on social cohesion and things that most people don't talk about in the pub, and they're making them kind of interesting. So I think it's interesting because you see there are people who want to tell stories about things that the EU does in new and creative ways. So I have hope that there are people there who actually care and who are trying a completely different language, completely outside of it's not, none of these are press releases coming out of the Commission. These are all stories posted on Instagram by these EU influencers who are just learning to tell that story. So tell us.
So you appreciate the virtues of concreteness and specificity, and it's really critical, I think, to good communications. And then I suppose the other thing I would say at the moment is that, can we please be more skeptical, especially if you're maybe talking to journalists or other people, even at the dinner table, more skeptical of companies and politicians who are framing ordinary situations, whether related to immigration or trade or elections, as existential crises requiring extraordinary actions. I mean, this tendency that we are increasingly hearing in our politics and in our public spaces to invoke crises, we must realize that a lot of this, not all the time, but quite a lot of the time, and increasingly so, especially if you look to what's happening across the Atlantic in the United States, is to justify extraordinary measures or to get concessions in terms of power. And, I think that it's going to be up to people to spend more time questioning these narratives. Are we really going to starve if the farmers don't get more money from the common agricultural policy? Are we really going to lose so many jobs if we collaborate with other countries on battery production, instead of spending billions trying to create our own batteries? I mean, you could go on and on, but we seem to have reached this point in our public discussions where everything has to be an existential crisis, even if it's the most mundane policy. And I think that it's going to be great I just hope that more and more people who are coming into the job market and who are coming into policy making can just push back against this and say, you know what, take your existential crisis and shove it, because I don't buy it. And I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's part of the polarization situation that we're in, which is, people also realize that the more extreme the position, the more traction they get, and potentially the more impact they have, because they've actually framed the thing as a kind of all or nothing thing. But I completely agree with you. I think we all need to become skeptical about things and critically try to understand them. I think it's not skeptical as in don't believe anything, but is skeptical as in do your homework, research things, try to understand them, and indeed try to get to a place where you understand that, you know, things are more complicated than people tend to state, and doing that exercise perhaps allows for more constructive conversations, because you can see that, you know, that there's just a lot of issues around everything. So skepticism with critical thinking, I guess that's perhaps where we get to. Did you have a final one, or are we ready for your book recommendation? You had a book recommendation to share with us?
Yeah. It's actually a book by Fran Lebowitz. If you haven't heard of her, here's the book. It's been republished a few times. Fran Lebowitz is a New Yorker through and through. She first popped up as a writer for Andy Warhol's magazine in New York. She knew Lou Reed. She's a great friend of the writer Toni Morrison. She's essentially a very droll and sardonic cultural critic. And one of her famous quotes is, "Think before you speak, read before you think." But she also has a bunch of hilarious lines, and she's very well known for these, like, "I love sleep because it is both pleasant and safe to use." So, I mean, she's really quite hilarious sometimes. And everyone loves her story about how she was kicked out of high school for what she calls non-specific surliness. And she's particularly cutting about what she sees as sort of a decline in cultural standards and the sham of the art world, or big art, where how much people pay for a Picasso painting is actually more important than the painting itself. Now, Martin Scorsese made a documentary on her 15 years ago called Public Speaking. And then there was another one that was released during COVID on Netflix that Scorsese made that's actually been really popular, called Pretend It's a City. And it's a really good watch. It's in 7 parts. And what's interesting about Fran Lebowitz is that she's really connecting again with people, with a new generation. I mean, partly as a result of this Netflix series, but I guess she's connecting with a lot of younger women too, because for so long, Fran has been emblematic of how women just don't have to conform. In fact, they can be just the opposite. And her writings in the book, in the Fran Lebowitz Reader, are still popular, including with the LGBT community, where she's pretty iconic. And actually, I'm introducing her at an event in Brussels on September the 20th. And yes, I mean, I remember her and her sense of humor very well when I was in university in New York City, and then from late night TV in the US, where she was often on the David Letterman show. But of course, with this gig coming up, I've been reacquainting myself with her stuff and her overall approach. So that's been a real joy. And certainly her first book in this collection, the Fran Lebowitz Reader, it is still in parts very, very funny.
Excellent. So my book recommendation is actually summer reading. Big book, Donata, the Little Friend. And basically, so as you can see, it's a real summer read. She wrote The Secret History and The Goldfinch. She takes 10 years to write every book, so at least she spends time researching them. And it's just, it's in the South. It's a murder mystery with a 12-year-old girl who's investigating the murder of her brother 12 years before. But it's all about the characters. It's all about the story. It's all about the very slow build. So again, perfect summer book. So that is all we have time for, James. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We will, of course, continue this conversation online and in the room on the 19th of September. Have a fantastic week, and I will see you around. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.